Welcome everyone to First Principles Podcast. Today is the episode which is a bit of a follow-up of the previous episode, which was focused on the carnivore diet and a alternative to the carnivore diet, and specifically looking at the carbon footprint, energy footprint, water consumption, all that kind of stuff associated with those diets. And in continuation from that, this episode is going to look at some different alterations to those diets, specifically a vegetarian / vegan specific diet, and also a cricket based diet. Yes, we're going to look at how these two different diets impact your carbon footprint, what are the water consumptions, the energy consumptions, land consumptions associated with them. And any thoughts going into it, Elliot?
Well, this whole concept of breaking down, our diets into their energy consumption has been something I've been fascinated with for a while. So I'm just curious to see what the results will be when we start to add in things like insect protein and just stepping away and taking out animal products altogether. It will be interesting to see some of the stats here.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the whole reason that we were interested in looking at insects or crickets more specifically is that, it's been kind of talked about as an alternative to getting a lot of our proteins and our calories, as an alternative from whether it's chicken, beef, pork, whatever it may be, just because the fact that they're so dense in terms of energy. They're little bugs, but they are really highly dense in protein, calories, nutrients, so on and so forth. I'm not sure about the nutrients, but
nutrients huge actually.
Nutrients huge. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. We'll get into that. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Yeah. So when we look at this CO2 footprint, we're gonna put up some graphs hopefully. But basically, what I did was look at some of the consumptions of the CO2 footprint if you were to essentially have a diet purely based on vegan or vegetarian style of consumption. So what does that mean? You're eating a lot of nuts such as almonds. We have rice, potato, cabbage. Those were kind of like the baseline things that we used. And when we're looking at the CO2 consumption, so it's came to about 4.2 kilograms of CO2 per day per person. So compared to the carnivore diet, you can see that's significantly less. So carnivore diet, again, was just a diet primarily based off of beef. So if you were to eat beef as your entire calorie intake on a daily basis.
Yep.
So a whole order of magnitude less, which is kind of what you would expect. It's in line with my assumption going into it that the CO2 footprint of a purely vegetarian based diet would be much lower than a carnivore based diet, and that's kind of like what we see here. And then any thoughts on the cricket side, Elliot?
Yeah. Well, for the CO2 for crickets, they're actually less than both chicken and beef. So I looked at two scenarios here. One where I substituted the chicken portion of our baseline diet out with crickets. And
if you don't know what Elliot is talking about, then you got to check out the previous episode. There's going to be a link in the description.
Absolutely. Check it out.
Chicken diet as the baseline diet. Sorry, go on, Elliot.
Yeah. So essentially for the mixed baseline scenario, we see that the CO2 is a little bit less for crickets. The data for CO2 footprint for crickets is limited. There still needs to be a lot more research done in this area. But there was one really good source I found where this researcher did a life cycle analysis of cricket production in Thailand that seemed quite thorough. Mm-hmm. And along with there's some rudimentary statements on websites that are promoting their cricket bars and cricket powder and stuff like that. But
yeah, have you tried any of those cricket bars?
I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't. Have you?
Only cricket chocolates, actually, not any protein bars. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely have to give that a try when I come across those.
Yeah, same. I am curious now doing this research for sure. But what we're seeing here for the CO2 footprint is about 4.7 kilograms of CO2 per day per person if you were to do 100% of your calorie, or if you were to meet 100% of your calorie needs through the consumption of crickets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty interesting because it kind of highlights that all of the, more or less, the diets that we've looked at have been, plus or minus within the same range of CO2 emissions, except for the carnivore diet. You really see that one as just being significantly greater than the others, where we have for the vegetarian or vegan, we have 4.2, cricket around 4.7. Our chicken baseline around 5.6, and our carnivore just jumps up to 31. So yeah, it really again highlights how it almost doesn't matter how you're doing it, but as long as you're not consuming too much beef, like that's really, I guess, what I'm kind of getting at from the data that we've been collecting so far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so looking at now the water. Okay, the water consumption, that was also something really interesting. How much water is something that we don't really always consider in North America because we're so abundant in water, but I think it's an important metric for us to really gauge. For example, places in Europe, it's much more expensive. The water cost there, so people are really mindful of it because over there it's much more scarce. It's a scarcity, right? So the cost reflects that per person. But over here, not so much. So, it's an interesting number to think about. And what we came across for the vegan diet specifically was that actually it resulted in greater water consumption than the vegetarian and chicken baseline from our previous episode. So where we had 0.54 Olympic-sized swimming pools, so that was the metric or the volume that we used. The units that we use were Olympic-sized swimming pools. But our vegan diet was actually more than the chicken/vegetarian diet, or chicken with vegetarian combination, chicken vegetable combination. So I don't know, that's kind of interesting to me. So, even though the vegan diet might be less in terms of the CO2 consumption, it really does have a greater impact in the water consumption. And that really, I think, was a result of a lot of the nuts that you have to consume as an alternative. So that was kind of like the baseline that I was using for my calculations, where it was almonds, hazelnuts, those types of pecans, those types of nuts as an alternative for your calories, because they are very calorie dense. So you can meet maybe 25 or 50% of your daily calorie intake from about 100 to 200 grams of almonds, for example. So it's a really great way of substituting your calorie intake if you're not getting it from meat or other types of carbs from those nuts. And but those nuts in turn have a much higher water consumption associated with them, and we see that reflected in the numbers. So, sometimes when you hear people talk about the vegan diets and now, they're better for the environment, well, I don't know, I guess this really goes to show that it depends on which metric we're looking at. If it's in terms of CO2 consumption, okay, maybe, but in terms of water consumption, I don't know, the jury's still out on that one from what I see anyways.
Yeah, but your diet is based on, what was it, 50% of your calorie needs per day were met by nut consumption?
Yeah,
50%.
Yeah. And 25 from different types of nuts.
Yes. Okay. So, and we did a breakdown on this, and what that equates to is about one of those plastic jugs of nuts you can get from Costco, which are about 1.1 kilograms. Going through one of those.
About the size of my head.
The size of your head.
That big old head.
Yeah.
Listen to this, you can't see my head. I have a decent big head.
There's a volume reference for one of Tree's heads here per week for an entire year.
A head of trees.
Head of trees. But so one of those jugs per week for an entire year. Actually, over that, 1.25 of those. So that's. Mm-hmm. That's a lot,
decent amount for sure.
And on the cricket side, I actually found that crickets require a lot less water to produce. Roughly there's some quotes out there that say that crickets require about 2,000 times less than beef when it comes to water, and about 50% less than chicken. With all that taken into consideration, when you substitute crickets for chicken in our baseline diet, our water consumption in terms of Olympic size swimming pools reduces to about 0.4. That's compared to 0.5, 0.6, which we had for the baseline. So a little bit less. And if you were just to go 100% crickets, you have about 0.65, 0.7 Olympic swimming pools per year per person if you're meeting all your needs through the consumption of crickets. Again, as I said earlier, the research is scarce on this. And I also had another number, which is significantly less. We're talking only about 8 meters cubed per year per person, which is like 0.003 Olympic swimming pools. Mm-hmm. But this, again, that number came from the, website that was advertising its cricket energy bars. So I'm a little bit skeptical of that number, but
could be some screwy numbers.
Could be some screwy numbers for sure. But generally, even just looking at, a lot of these hobby websites or these blog posts and Reddit feeds that talk about they're set up by people who raised crickets. It seems that generally water needs of crickets are pretty minimal. Interesting.
So we do see some variation in terms of the water consumption associated with these various diets, but it's similar to the CO2 where they're more or less within the same ballpark. But then again, comparing it to the straight beef diet, that's where you really see a significant change or a significant difference in the order of magnitude from the water consumption associated, where for the carnivore it was up to 2 Olympic sized swimming pools, but for everything else it's more or less around 5, 6. So again, some variation, but more in the same ballpark of values. Okay. So next we looked at land. Okay, what is the land consumption, or the square area of land that's necessary in order to sustain each one of these diets? So for this one, we weren't able to find anything specifically for crickets, or actually we found a little bit. Maybe you want to go a bit more detail on that one?
Sure. Yeah. What I found was the area needed in terms of a container to raise crickets. So crickets need about 2.5 square centimeters per cricket, which works out to about 1.3 meters cubed squared for 5,000 crickets, which would be the number of crickets you would need to consume daily if you were to eat or if you were to meet 100% of your calorie needs on crickets. The issue with this number is that it doesn't take into consideration the land area needed to produce the food that the crickets are consuming.
Right.
So we're not going to compare this to our other values, but something to note is if you were to raise crickets, they take about 4 weeks to mature. So if you wanted to have a continuous supply of them, you would need essentially a shed about 3 meters by 3 meters that had like 4 shelves on them of crickets. So it seems like a small footprint. Again, doesn't include the land area needed for their food, but relatively small.
Right. And it's like pretty much sustainable throughout, right? Year in, year out.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
And what we found was that, surprisingly somewhat, when we're looking at the vegan or vegetarian diet, it was actually more land that it consumed in relation to our baseline chicken vegetable mix diet. So for the vegan / vegetarian diet, it was 0.1 hectares per year per person, whereas for the chicken and vegetable mix, it was 0.7. So a bit of a difference there again. But again, significantly less than when we looked at the land consumption associated with the straight beef diet, which was around 2.8. But I mean, again, when it comes to land consumption, I mean, that's a bigger net environmental footprint that your vegan diet is having versus your vegan and chicken or vegetarian and chicken mix, which again might be something contrary to what you hear a lot of vegan activists talk about. And you know, of course, there's variations, there's so many different alternatives, and I mean, if you guys have some alternative suggestions that you guys would like for us to look at, please feel free to leave them in the comments. But again, this was kind of based off of the land area used from using almonds, walnuts, hazelnuts, those types of things. And you know, these things do require a lot of agricultural space, and they are demanding in that sense. So again, when it comes to the environmental footprint and sustainability of these different types of diets, we see that similar to the water, the land consumption is a bit higher for that vegan mix compared to vegetarian and chicken mix. So I don't know, I found that a pretty interesting finding when we were digging up the numbers. And if you guys want to double check our sources, again, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to share them with you. Leave it in the comments, and if there's enough of a demand, or you know, send us an email directly, and we'll be happy to reply with our sources. But yeah, I found that a pretty interesting finding for the land consumption that's associated with these different diets. And I guess finally, and most interestingly, perhaps we moving on to the energy consumption that's associated with these different diets. And I guess what was really fascinating that came out of it was that with the vegan vegetarian mix, it was a significant energy consumption that's associated with these diets. So with and specifically with the nuts. So what we found for almonds, for example, is that 1 kilogram of almond produced requires about 35 to 29 megajoules of energy. So mega. And then if you were to get, for example, based on our assumptions, about 25% or even 50% of your daily calorie needs from almonds, for example, that's going to be a lot of energy that you're demanding. And specifically, we, you know, compared to like the carnivore diet in terms of the kilojoules per year per person, it was way more, like a whole order of magnitude more, as you guys hopefully will put up with our numbers. But for the carnivore, we have 152,000 kilojoules per year per person, whereas for the vegan mix, we have 1.3 million. So again, a whole order of magnitude difference. And that was kind of for me like the most surprising thing, which is again significantly higher for the vegan / vegetarian diet compared to like the carnivore baseline, and also the chicken and vegetable baseline. I don't know, like what do you think about that, Elliot?
It's shocking. Yeah. It's really shocking. And what did we find out about where these different energy sources or energy demands are coming from? It was primarily from
the nutrients. So for the
fertilizer.
Exactly. So for example, for almonds, what we found was that it was really heavy in the energy demand because it's really heavy in its nutrient use. So nutrients being stuff like your ammonias, your phosphorus, so nitrogen's phosphorus, which is your fertilizer to help you grow your crop. And these are very energy intensive processes, and you really see that reflected in the values. So like, again, so if somebody tells you that the vegan/vegetarian diet is the best for the environment, like, I don't know, some of these numbers are really, for me, making me scratch my head and making me question those assumptions. So I don't know. It's very interesting.
But you have to take into consideration that a lot of the energy consumption is to do with the productions of nuts like almonds and hazelnuts. If you were to get rid of those, when you look at the other components of the diet, cabbage and other grains that we have, they're not as surprising. They are actually quite less energy intensive. But it comes to the question becomes, you're going to need some, or the argument could be made that you're going to need some protein dense, fat dense, plant-based products in your diet realistically. And where are you going to get those from if not from nuts?
Cheese.
Yeah, I mean,
but again, that's if you're vegetarian. If you're vegan, then I mean, you're gonna be using nuts, I guess, right?
Yeah,
like nuts, potatoes. I don't know. It's I don't. We're gonna have to do some more research on this one, but yeah. Sorry, go on, Elliot.
No, I was just gonna say that it doesn't seem to be a free lunch in terms of creating anything that has a high protein, high calorie, high fat content. There's always going to be demands to create something that's dense.
Exactly. I guess, that's what really the lesson is, that, to get energy into a final product, whether it's a nut, a beef, a chicken, whatever, a cow, that takes energy input to get that energy output. So that's what really these numbers have highlighted for me. And you might be paying more you might be saving in terms of CO2 with one diet, but then you might be spending more in terms of your water consumption or your land consumption. So it's really kind of shows that maybe a well-balanced diet of just your basic vegetables, some chicken, that's kind of like, I don't know, from what I'm seeing, the best, not the best, but like it seems to be like the most reasonable, kind of like a balanced diet of your greens, your basic chicken protein, that kind of stuff, and you're good to go. I don't know.
Having that diversity is not just good for your well-being in terms of getting different nutrients that you need, but maybe also for balancing out the entire footprint of your diet.
Variety is the spice of life.
Spice of life. Yeah, a good point. The other thing I want to highlight too, which I think we spoke about before, but is very important, is there is a lot of different practices out there when it comes to slaughtering animals, to raising animals, to growing vegetables. And these studies that we look at to get our values have had to look at a specific type of practice and derive their values. And so there are places out there that are doing it better than others, which result in lower values, and there's places out there that are doing worse than others. So there is a lot of
it's a heterogeneous field.
That's right. Yeah.
There's so much variation out there. This is not to say by any means that this is the end all be all, our calculations, and we're definitely open to any suggestions that people might have. Again, if you're interested to see where we got some of our values from, feel free to email us. We'll have a contact page, a link down below. And I'm not sure if you have anything else to add for this, Elliot.
Well, you know what? I just wanted to point out, we looked at crickets, which was pretty strange. I thought, it was, it's certainly a unique way to get your protein, but that's the perspective that I think is born from me being raised up, in North America, because really there's about 2 billion people that eat insects worldwide. So
put it like that. Yeah.
A third of the Earth population, this is not abnormal. This is
For real.
a practice that people, they do on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
get over the gross side of things and get into the actual benefits of eating insects, and not both just on their nutrition side, but on their environmental footprint. It's a very promising area that I'm excited to see how it advances. And wanted to, I think we touched on this at the beginning. You were asking, are they, how do they stack up nutrition wise? Well, interestingly enough, I got a figure here that looks at crickets compared to ground beef, and protein wise, it has about 3 times more protein than ground beef, about the same amount of fats, both saturated and non-saturated, and there's a bit more carbohydrates associated with the cricket, but you're eating the
legs and stuff,
Yeah, exactly, right? But by not just eating the muscle, which we do when we eat beef and stuff like that, you're getting all these different micronutrients. That's why you have them. They're high in vitamin B's and a slew of other vitamins. So this is the benefit to eating crickets.
Interesting. I mean, that definitely helps put things into perspective as well. These are nutrient dense foods. The focus of this podcast isn't necessarily on nutrition and that kind of stuff, but it is worthy to note how rich in energy and nutrients these things are. And I mean, I could definitely see it as being a fad that takes over North America. Like you said, to a whole different part of the world, this is totally normal. And with globalization, with the global village that we're living in, it's easy to find videos of, I don't know, how to make a nice cricket oatmeal dish, or I don't know, like there's going to be a lot more exposure to those types of different ways of thinking and different ways of living and eating, and it's gonna be interesting to see how things unfold.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the biggest hurdle they have in front of them is making it palatable to your average North American, because seeing a dead cricket in your oatmeal, it's just a lot of people are going to be turned off by this. When they come out with the Beyond Cricket Burger, maybe that's the move. You got to make it look like something people know.
Exactly.
And that's gonna make it
like
appetizing.
A black bean burger or something, like black bean cricket burger. You gotta like inject it into the culture slowly, like that. You know, like first half of your black bean burger is gonna be cricket, and then next thing you know, it's gonna be a full cricket burger, and we're gonna bite into it and be like, oh damn, this cricket.
This is crazy. It tastes just like beef.
Yeah, because it's got the same fat, right? It's got the fatty nature, so that's what our bodies crave, that fatty goodness sometimes. So well, okay. So that was First Principles Podcast, the cricket/vegan vegetarian podcast. Let us know down in the comments if there are any other diets that you'd like us to look at, and how those diets link to the carbon footprint, the energy footprint, those types of things. We're always looking for good ideas. And First Principles Podcast, our motto is breaking down from the ground up.
Breaking it down from the ground up.
And until next time, we'll catch you soon.
Peace.
Peace.